Hello and welcome to the Antiviral Forum, a discussion surrounding the challenges young people are facing and the positive role that they're playing during COVID-19. Listen, it's been a really difficult time for everybody, missing big milestones in your lives, having limited contact and physical touch. And I know that it can be so disheartening when you see videos of large groups of people coming out of house parties or gathering in the street. We know that this is the minority and not the majority, that most of you at home are following the guidelines and keeping safe and fighting COVID-19. Being antiviral is living your life within the guidelines, but having fun while you do it. This movement has been created to shine a light on all the positive efforts that you've been making in the fight against COVID-19, but most importantly, to give you a voice. I'm your host, Laura Fox, and today we will be joined by Irish content creators who will be bringing forward your questions and concerns to the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Ronan Glynn. We want to hear your voices and hopefully put some of your fears and anxieties around COVID-19 at ease and encourage each other to live happily and safely within the guidelines. And now I'm so buzzed to be joined by podcaster Podge Henry of The Podcast. Podge, I don't know about you, but I know that I consume most of my information via social media.
Yeah, so do I, and I think most of my friends do too. And it's great because it means like you have such a fast access to information and so much information. But then the risk is people like me, I don't really watch the news as much as my parents would have, or the radio. And that's why a campaign like this is great, because it's a great way to kind of get the information out to the people between the age of 18 and 24, you know, and it's a great way for Dr. Ronan Glynn to reach them and showcase how proud he is of the generation. And yeah.
Well, we're so happy to have you here today, and I'm sure that there's a lot of excitement around your followers who have brought their sentiments forward to you. Yeah,
there was. I think they were surprised at first. They were like, what, this is an amazing opportunity. And I was like, I know. But yeah, the questions came in, and once, you know, you have your friends who might throw one of the funny questions at you, but there actually was a lot of genuine questions, a lot of genuine points that will be raised today. And I think it was great to give the opportunity for them and for me to be a voice for them, because, you know, it's not homogenous thinking, but we're all in this together, you know. Dr. Glynn, thank you very much for being here and taking the time out of your incredibly important and busy schedule. And I'm delighted to be given the opportunity to talk to you on behalf of my generation. But I suppose before I kind of get into the questions, is there anything that you want to say to the young people watching?
Yeah, there is. I suppose I'm delighted to have the opportunity to be here and to have the opportunity to communicate directly with younger people, because it's something we've been struggling with. We have the press conferences, we have the daily updates, and we have our radio interviews, but it can be difficult to get particular messages across. And you know, it's been a really difficult year for people of all ages. At times, I mean, we're really conscious every evening when we sit at those press conferences and we ask people to take our messages on board. We're always really conscious of the impact that those asks have on people's lives. And we know that you know, the pandemic has impacted on younger people's relationships, on their education, on their social lives, on their employment opportunities, probably more than any other generation. And so we never take lightly the asks that we make of people. But I think in particular, there's an opportunity through Antiviral and through hopefully today's conversation to change the direction of some of the conversation. I've been really...
In what way?
Yeah, I've been really conscious that, not alone in Ireland, but internationally, increasingly the conversation about who's right and who's wrong instead of what's right. So are the doctors right? Is this expert right versus that expert? Is this politician right versus that politician? Should we do this or do that in policy terms? When in fact what we should be doing is celebrating the enormous achievements that we've made in this country to keep this pandemic under the control that we've kept it. And I'm not talking about achievement at policy level or government level. I'm talking about what people do individually in their families and communities.
Day-to-day life.
Yeah. So if nothing else was to come out of this conversation, I would want people to know that what they have done has been phenomenal. And without them doing most of the things correctly most of the time, regardless of what we said at a national level, regardless of what levels were in place, they simply wouldn't work. It comes down to what people do on the ground, and in particular in relation to younger people. We've seen a phenomenal decrease in the disease in younger people over the past number of weeks in particular. And that's testament to their willingness to get on board and keep on board with the messages and to do the right things. So I suppose if anything comes out of today, it's about turning the conversation to a positive one about the things that we can do and have been doing safely, and to keep doing those over the coming months.
Absolutely. I think it's nice to really see the credit to the young people and the work that you're noticing that we're doing. You mentioned earlier on the difficulties, certainly in social aspects, for the young people of Ireland today, and I reached out to followers and asked for questions for you. And one of the things that constantly popped up was in terms of social life and meeting people, and when are we allowing to meet friends, and if so, what's the best way to do that?
Try to meet up in a small group, so meet 1 or 2 people instead of meeting 5 or 6 people. And the reason for that is that, so myself and yourself are sitting here today and we're socially distant, we're having a conversation. I came from my household this morning, which has 3 other people in it. I don't know how many people are in your household.
There's 3 others as well. Yeah.
3 others. So if I have COVID, or if you have COVID, and if we don't act appropriately, I can give it to you, you can give it to me, and suddenly we're now dealing with 2 households that are likely to have further cases, which will lead to further cases. And you don't know who in my household might be particularly vulnerable to the condition, and neither do I of your household. And obviously then that gets magnified if there's 3 or 4 or 5 people in a conversation. So keeping meetups small is a key part of it. And then when you do meet up with people, try to meet them outside, because when you meet up with people outside, it's much more likely that when you're speaking, when you're talking, if you are transmitting the virus, that the wind is blowing it away effectively, and it's much less likely that I'll give it to you or you'll give it to me.
We talked about there, I suppose, about meeting people in a social aspect, but when it comes to, let's say, relationships, certainly with the younger people, they might be living with their other halves or their boyfriend and girlfriend, and I guess for the first time in my life, I'm probably happy I'm single, so I don't have that issue. But one of the questions that came in from someone was about not living with their boyfriend, and as many people our age don't, it's very difficult when no other household visits are allowed. What would be your thoughts on couples who do not live together during different levels of restrictions?
So look, I mean, the official advice is the official advice, but like, I live in the real world. If, we know we have to be realistic about this, and people are going to meet up with their partners. Hopefully, the key thing in this is whether you're meeting up with your partner or whether you're meeting up with your friends or extended family or colleagues, is that each person just takes a step back for a minute and spends 5 minutes thinking about their own situation. And because everyone's home situation, everyone's family life, everyone's work life is different. And so for each of us, the choices that we make and the basis upon which we make choices around who we meet and when we meet will be different. It's about doing your own risk assessment. So for example, Christmas is coming up. And I don't know yet what the advice will be around Christmas, around meeting extended family and all of that. But for example, my granny is in a nursing home in Galway. And so I haven't seen her for over a year. But if I was going to visit her at some point over the next week or 2, I would certainly make sure that I effectively restricted my movements and didn't meet up with anybody at all for the next couple of weeks, so that I could be sure in the knowledge that I wasn't going to bring COVID to her, put her at risk. So it's that kind of thing that we need to do. And I know it's exhausting, the idea of doing a risk assessment on yourself every day, but it takes about 30 seconds. Just think, where do you plan to go today? Who are you planning to meet over the next couple of weeks? What little actions can you do differently? If you're going to meet 5 or 6 people, can you meet them individually over a longer period of time rather than a group coming together? None of this is easy and none of this is straightforward. And people want black and white from us all the time. We can't give it because everybody's situation is different, and we need to be really honest about that. But what we want people to do is, I suppose, to take the responsibility onto themselves. And the point is that people are doing that. Like, we know the vast majority of people are doing this. The vast majority of people in this country of all ages are acting responsibly.
Just to encourage them to continue
to keep doing what people are doing. Yeah.
And now we are so honoured to be joined by Erica Higgier, who is studying law at NUI Galway and who last year got to speak in front of the Dáil as part of the Youth Movement for Climate Change. Eric, today's a very special day. You're joining us on your birthday.
Indeed.
And well, happy birthday from all of us.
Thank you so much.
And thank you so much for joining us. But I really want to know, why is this so important for the youth movement?
Yeah, I think it's fundamental for the youth movement. If you look at any major social movement that has arose throughout the lifespan of activism here in Ireland, you know, whether it's gender equality, racial equality, and other issues, climate change, we see that young people have been at the forefront of those movements. So with COVID-19, such a pressing issue, I don't think it'd be right to not have the voices of young people at the decision-making table. And I'm so happy that the creators today, who are all young people, are going to be able to represent the views of the youth and put them to Dr. Ronan Glynn today.
At such a young age, you have so much knowledge and you're so passionate about everything that you believe in. What was the driving force for you? How did you get involved in this movement?
Yeah, just noticing how COVID-19 has impacted young people all across the country. You know, usually young people are involved with activist issues, again, like social injustice or climate change. But COVID-19 has had an unprecedented impact, not only on politics and the economy and jobs and other things regarding public life, but young people. You know, we've really been hit hard by this issue. So I think having young people and creators at the forefront of this issue, like with other social issues that are aforementioned, I think it's so important. So that is really the kind of motivating factor that has swayed me into this position today.
Well, we're so delighted to have you, Eric.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Dr. Glynn.
Okay.
Lovely to meet you. My name is Eric and I'm a second year student at NUI Galway. What do you say to those fresher students that are not experiencing the first year university experience in the conventional way, in comparison to secondary school students that get to access to educational resources in person?
So first of all, their grievances are justified. They're being asked to go without an experience that's a rite of passage, that many of us have experienced and gone through, looked forward to, and they're being asked to do it in an entirely different way, and it's not fair. So I'm not going to sit here and suggest that it's easy or that it's fair. It's not. But the ask on them versus secondary students, it's people sometimes characterise the recommendations that we make as a judgment by us on the value of one activity or the value of one group over another, and it's not about that at all. Or the relative safety of one activity versus another. So the easiest thing in the world and the best way to completely stop the spread of this virus is to just close our schools, close everything, and tell people to stay at home and not come out for another 6 months. That's entirely implausible. And we have made as a national priority, as part of this phase of our management of COVID, the education of our children. Because they were disproportionately impacted last spring. And we recognise the impact that a further closure of schools would have. It's not just about their education, it's about all of the other elements of their physical and mental health and social lives that are an inherent part of going to secondary school. So that's why schools have been kept open. We have endeavoured, and we want third level, we want education to proceed as normally as possible, but it's just not possible at the moment because of the virus. So again, I suppose it's just an opportunity for me to say thank you to freshers, and hopefully, next year, next year they will get to experience what every other year has experienced previously. But equally, they should be very proud of what they're doing, because again, without the vast majority of freshers doing what they're doing at the moment, we would not have seen the very significant reductions that we've seen in the disease over the past number of weeks in that age group.
Yeah, on behalf of freshers, I'd like to thank you. I think that acknowledgement is something that will mean a lot to a lot of freshers who are enduring the academic year in the way that they are this year. My next question is related to the fact that our society is made up of a multitude, an array of different people that come from different socioeconomic and familial backgrounds. Therefore, staying at home during the pandemic is not an easy option for a lot of people. So what do you say to the people that have found it hard to stay at home during the pandemic because of how hard home life might be?
So there's a couple of parts to this. The first is that we are a diverse community in this country, and I would hope that, I'd hope that, like, we're not in a great place at the moment and it's very difficult for people. But I would hope that one of the learnings that comes out of this pandemic is that we all depend on each other and that there's a greater recognition of the extent to which none of us are independent republics in this country and that we need to look out for the most vulnerable in society. Yeah. That's the first point, and I would hope that would be a lasting legacy of the pandemic. The second piece is that, again, when we sit and we speak at press conferences and ask people to follow guidance, we recognise that various elements of what we're asking are easier or harder for different parts of our community and for people. We tell people to stay at home. Within that, we recognise that there are many people who simply, for a variety of different reasons, can't stay at home and need to get out of their homes. But what we're trying to do is to get people to make choices. Not everybody has a choice. If the majority of people make the correct choices, they will make up for and they will protect those who simply can't make those choices, whatever their situations are. And so I suppose I don't know the precise, obviously, scenario of any one individual, but if there's someone who, for a particular reason, can't follow one or more bits of the guidance that we're giving, that's why it's all the more important that those who can make those safe choices to protect those people who can't for whatever reason.
And now we are super excited to have Chris Murphy, better known to all of you as Chris's Anam Dom Chris. I mean, you are just a positive ray of sunshine that comes out through my phone. How has that helped you during this entire global pandemic?
I mean, all I've been doing is kind of making videos and everyone's like, you're so positive and so helping out. So I think just trying to find a way to connect with other people online, if it's online concerts, discos, we did Pride online this year and everything. So it's just kind of being able to put that creativity into some passion project for me because obviously a lot of people aren't working at the moment, so. Well,
you've adapted very well. And I mean, I did say to you, you have been a positive ray of sunshine coming out, but where are you pulling your inspiration from? Like, I mean, your videos are mad. Oh,
thanks. Just an idea will come into my head and I think, okay, I need to film this, and then I have different characters. I bought wigs, I've put money into this. So it's just kind of, acting to mag it online, I suppose.
Well, we're here for it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for answering our questions today, and it's very important for young people, so I really appreciate it. You touched on Christmas earlier in the conversation with Podge, and it's obviously something that's on young people's mind. So a lot of my followers were actually concerned about, how Christmas might operate this year, just really concerned that it might be very different. Would you have any advice for young people celebrating Christmas?
I think, again, to be honest with people, it will be different. We won't be able to do a lot of the things that we did last Christmas or that hopefully we'll be able to do next Christmas. Precisely what we will or won't be able to do in terms of measures that we'll be recommending, I can't get into that just yet. It's a little bit too far away, and there'll be more information on that coming over the coming days and weeks. But so in general terms, what we want people of all ages to do this Christmas, again, is to think about what they're doing before they do it. If you're going to meet up with a friend or with a couple of friends, have a very quick chat. I know it's not cool to do it, but have a very quick chat beforehand and say, look, how can we do this safely? Can we meet up outside? If you're going into someone's house, wear a face covering. Again, I know it's not the coolest thing in the world to do, but it'll keep you safe, it'll keep them safe. Ask them to open a window. Ventilation is very important. Okay. So we won't be asking people to take on board behaviours that we haven't asked people to take on board over the past 6 or 9 months. Yeah. But in general terms, we don't want people having big parties around Christmas. We obviously we don't want big family groups getting together because, again, as I said earlier, you never know who within your group will be the person who will turn out to be particularly vulnerable to COVID. So again, it's just about planning ahead all the time, unfortunately, and I know that's not an easy message.
No, that's fair, that makes sense. A very conscious Christmas, I suppose, we'll all have. Another important question that we did get, just kind of in relation to that, one of the questions from the followers is, why are the airports open to people travelling from other countries to Ireland, while our brothers and sisters who live abroad are being asked not to travel home for Christmas?
So the airports have been kept open throughout because, as well as tourists coming in, we need to get vital goods and services out of the country and vital goods and services into the country. But our advice is the same to people, whether they're your brother or sister. I have a brother who lives outside the country, and our advice to him is the same as our advice to people from other countries who would want to come here as tourists. And it's simply that, given where we are with this disease at the moment, and particularly given what we're seeing internationally at the moment, this is just unfortunately not the year for mass travel. Okay. There will always be people who have to travel for essential reasons, but we're asking people, and this has been one of the hardest parts of managing this over time, is that people haven't seen each other. But we're really asking people just for this Christmas, just to avoid that, because what we don't want is a normal Christmas that leads us to have a January and February where our health service is in real trouble and where people and members of our families are getting sick.
And now we are delighted to be joined by Ronan Glynn, a very passionate physiotherapist who's studying a master's in sports psychology. Along with all of your radio work, do you ever sleep?
I don't. I drink a lot of caffeine and there's a lot of late nights. But yeah, I decided to go back and study a master's this year, back in January, ahead of all of this happening. But it's been the perfect year to do it, because with such a high workload, I'm not sure I would have been able to engage in normal life. So we haven't had to.
I've been following your stories and you've been super active all the time. Has that been a real help for you studying your master's?
It has, absolutely. It's been a reason to get out of the house, and we haven't got too many of those at the moment. But one of my classes is exercise psychology and the benefits of that on our mental well-being. So it's been essentially like my own little experiment, seeing how it can have such drastic improvements to my own mood. So yeah, it's been huge. It's been a huge help from a learning perspective as well, to actually get this kind of situation and get to actually see the acute benefits of exercise and physical activity. So I am a huge advocate of it. This question came in from a huge sports fan, and they ask, do you mind asking Dr. Glynn if he thinks Ireland is heading in the right direction, and when will fans of football be allowed back in to spectate?
So there's two parts to that question, so I'll answer them separately and quickly. So that the first part is, are we heading in the right direction? Definitely. We've made huge progress over the last few weeks. The problem with that is that we need to keep doing that. And so we need to keep in the right direction. We need to keep in the right place for the next 6 months at least. When will we have full stadia again? I can't say at this point. We need to see what happens with vaccines. We need to see what happens with testing. I think it'll be certainly the second half of next year before we're looking at that. But what I'd say to people on that, because I'm a huge sports fan, is that the thing that keeps me going, or one of the things that keeps me going, is that I can't wait for the day that I'm sitting in the Aviva or sitting in Croke Park in the middle of a full crowd, listening to the anthem or listening to the roar of the crowd, and realising that we've come through this as a country, and really feeling the pride for our counties and for our country having come through it. So I would ask people to focus on that, to try and balance up against the disappointment that they're feeling at the moment of not being able to go and support. I'd love nothing more than to be able to go and watch Galway beating Tipperary tomorrow, but unfortunately it's not to be.
That's a personal opinion there, Ronan. This is a difficult question, I suppose, and it can be an awkward situation. My parents are anti-maskers and I'm not. We argue a lot. How can I get them to adhere to guidelines?
Again, I think part of this is the issue of what's within your control as an individual. We can't control other people's behaviour, whether it's your parents or your kids or your friends. All really we have control over is what we do ourselves. And so I'd ask that person to, and I know it's difficult, but if their parents or if someone else in their life has a particularly strong view at this stage on masks, for example, they're probably not going to change that view. So they need to reflect on that themselves and just focus on what they can do to keep themselves safe. There will always be people in this country and internationally who have a completely different perspective on what's happened over the past year, who have a completely different perspective on what works and what doesn't, and what the right thing is versus what an alternative strategy is. What I can say is that from our perspective, we will do our best, have done our best, and continue to do our best to give the best advice that we can based on the evidence. And I'm confident that most people are listening to that, taking it on board, and most people continue to do the right thing. And I'd ask people to focus on what the majority are doing, rather than perhaps what seems like a relatively large group. If you look at social media or look at other media outlets, focus on what you're doing yourself, what your friends are doing, and kind of focus on what's happening in your community rather than what the world is saying, I suppose. And be confident that most people in your community have exactly the same worries as you have and are doing their best to do exactly the right things just as you are.
And now the girl that needs no introduction, the young offender star, Dancing with the Stars queen. It is Demi Isaac.
Oh, thank you. Don't say queen because I didn't win, but that's fine.
You were a queen in all of our eyes anyway. You provided endless entertainment. But what I really want to know from today is, how do you feel about having such a positive impact and being a role model, I suppose, accidentally?
It's great. I have loads of power. No, I'm joking. It's very nerve-wracking because you don't realise how much influence you have towards people. So you have to kind of make sure you're setting a good example. Like, the way I see it is, if I was younger, would I look up to older me? And that's what I'm here to do, is be that older sibling that a lot of people may or may not have.
I think we can all agree that our lives has changed drastically over the last year. A lot of questions have been brought up by my friends, my family, and a lot from my followers about our mental health. Does the government/NEFA take into consideration how lockdown has affected young people's mental health?
Yeah, we do, absolutely. So I'm trained in what's called public health medicine, which is a piece of medicine like cardiology or orthopedics or general practice. And the whole premise of public health medicine is that we look at the population. So it's not that we're more interested in, but the work that we do is focused on groups of people rather than individuals.
Yeah.
And so we would always be conscious in the work that we do that the measures that we're recommending, the advice that we're giving, has particular impacts on particular groups, whether it's younger people, whether it's particular vulnerable groups within our society, and of course then on mental health. I guess, and it's very difficult to prove this, but part of the basis for our decision making or the recommendations we make is that if we don't make those recommendations, if we let the pandemic loose through this country, and we have many more people getting sick, many more people living with the long-term effects of COVID, many more people dying from COVID, the mental health impact of that will also be very, very significant.
Yeah.
So there is a trade-off, and it's really difficult. It's not easy. But I have no doubt that the pandemic has really impacted the mental health of people all across this country over the past year, lockdown or no lockdown. So if we never had a lockdown, the fact that there's a 24-hour news cycle, the fact that we're hearing bad news all the time from all parts of the world, all of that impacts on us. The fact that we can't meet up with our friends, the fact that we can't do all of the normal things that we do as part of life, all of that has a huge impact. We recognise that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we're in a very difficult position where we have to balance that against what will happen if we don't make the recommendations that we make at a point in time. We've made great progress in Ireland over the past few weeks. Europe hasn't been as successful. And there's someone dying every 17 seconds in the European region at the moment from COVID. And the mental health impact of that on families, on extended families, on communities all across Europe is also colossal. So there's no easy answer to this. But to answer your question in short, we live in our communities, we've got friends, we've got families. We're really conscious all the time of the impact of the measures that we have to recommend at a point in time.
This one's my favourite. A lot of the followers and a lot of people have been wondering, how exactly have you been occupying your time when you're not in the office or if you're not doing your job during this whole lockdown? For example, I've made banana bread upon banana bread upon banana bread. I learned a new language that I'm not successful in. How does Dr. Ronan Glynn pass his time during the lockdown?
I have very little time, to be honest, when I'm not in the office. I have 2 children. I have a boy and a little girl. So really, it's like when I'm not in the office, it's just being at home with my wife and the 2 children. What I would say is I had a couple of weeks off recently, and just to get back to your first question about mental health. So one of the things I did for the couple of weeks was I turned off all social media on my phone, and I turned off the news. Didn't read a newspaper for 2 weeks. And it was phenomenal. And so I would say to people, and I'm not the first to say this, but like definitely in relation to COVID, people should be rationing their exposure to it.
Yeah.
You know, there are, I mean, I would say this, but I would say there are sources which you can trust in terms of the information that you're getting, but you don't need to get that information 10 times a day. You don't need to wait for the latest update on the vaccine 10 times a day. All of that is impacting on people's mental health. And I couldn't believe how much better I felt at the end of 2 weeks of not being on Twitter, of not reading the paper, of not listening to the news all the time about the latest developments, and just spending time at home with my family and getting out in the fresh air and going for walks. So maybe that will help someone else out there, but yeah, I guess very little time outside of work for the last year.
I'm just going to guess you didn't make banana bread, so during the first lockdown. All right, perfect. That's perfect. That's everything.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
And now we're joined by Aisling Kearns, the star of Darklands, the Lieutenant of Inishmore, and my personal favourite, Asking for It. Aisling, thank you so much for joining us today, but most importantly, how are you feeling about the day?
Super excited, absolutely delighted to be here. Honestly, when I was asked to be part of this campaign, this movement, I was like, yes, this is what we need to talk about. Get the young people's voice heard. We're not all going to house parties. Some of us are actually following the guidelines. So far in my career, this is my mother's proudest moment. So thank you for talking to us today. As someone who has a dance and performing background, this question really struck a chord with me. So one of my followers asked, I would love to know whether music, drama, and particularly dance lessons could be considered the same as sports training. I would even do dance classes outdoors if they were allowed.
So this is a difficult one, and I suppose you asked this question today, you ask it in 2 weeks' time, it could be a different answer. So, you know, we'll just need to see where we are in a week's time. For now, obviously it's not part of the measures that we recommend. There are reasons why we recommend the measures that we recommend at a point in time. I don't have an easy answer to it, unfortunately. Outside is better than indoors. So if someone is going to dance, then dance outside. If you're going to dance in a group, dance in a smaller group rather than a larger group. I know well that the person who asked that question is not going to be happy with my answer. But unfortunately, I can't give any more definitive an answer than that at the moment. We just need to see where things go with the disease at the moment.
The antiviral movement is all about spreading positivity and not placing blame. But we can find ourselves in tough situations like this person says. What should a person do if they see their friends at house parties and they don't agree with it? Even when meeting outdoors, it can be hard to tell your friends that they're coming too close, etc.
This is really difficult, but you know, we are adults at the same time. So there's a couple of elements to your question. First of all, there's this issue of blame. So we really, really need to move away from that. And when we give advice or when we ask people to do something differently, it's not because, and I know sometimes it comes across as us giving out or us admonishing people for not doing something properly. But in fact, as I've been at pains to say on numerous occasions, like most people are doing the right things most of the time. So I really welcome this movement as a way of moving towards what people can do and how people are doing things correctly, as opposed to constantly focusing on what people are not doing and how people could be doing better. But to your specific piece, I suppose, I would ask, I mean, young people ultimately are the drivers of sentiment in a population. They are the biggest influencer, to my mind, of where we go. If you're meeting up with a group of friends, as I've said previously, try to make a plan. So the first thing to do is discuss this in advance. Like if you arrive into a situation where everyone is doing something that you're not comfortable with, it's very difficult at that point to be the one that starts pointing out what the right thing to do is, because obviously none of us wants to be the one who stands out from the crowd.
Yeah.
We don't want to be that person, so it's really difficult.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you so much, Dr. Glynn, for joining us today and answering all of the questions so honestly and hopefully easing some of the anxieties around COVID-19. Have you any final thoughts on today's conversation?
Yeah, it was really nice to have what felt like a conversation, to be honest, because sometimes with the press conferences and with, doing interviews with journalists, whatever, you sometimes don't get to feel like you're communicating directly with the people you really want to be communicating with. I hope some of the themes we touched on today or some of the answers that I've given will allow younger people to reflect. I just hope they know the extent to which we value the actions that they've taken and that they continue to take, and that the impact that they are having. And back in August or September, I made a call out to younger people to kind of act as role models and to drive forward our response to this. And I suppose, I'm confident that they will do that again over the next few months. It's been a really nice opportunity. And I hope, as I said at the start, that if this can change the narrative just a little bit so that we're talking about what people can do and talking in a more positive sense, then it'll have achieved an awful lot, I think.
Well, I suppose from our entire generation, we do want to say a massive thank you to you. You've got a very tough job. You are handling it as well as you possibly can, but very honestly as well, and that's all we can ever ask from you. Thank you to everyone for joining us today, to all of our content creators who brought your questions to the table, and hopefully it eases some of your anxieties around COVID-19. Right now, we just got to live our lives and live it in the best possible COVID-19 way. It's time to be antiviral.